Hello, welcome everyone. This is the Windsor and the Post-Pandemic Healthy City, a community conversation. This event has been sponsored by the Windsor Law Center for Cities with the generous support of sponsors including the Canadian Urban Institute, the University of Windsor School of Creative Arts, the City of Windsor, through the generosity of Councillor Renaud Bordlin's ward funding, and I believe Renaud will be joining us today, if he's not already here already. Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare, the Downtown Windsor BIA, the University of Windsor We Spark Health Institute, Workforce Windsor Essex, Windsor Law's Law, Disability and Social Change, Mean Studio Architects, Border City Living, and Biblioasis. My name is Mita Williams, and I will be your moderator for the next hour and a half. This community conversation is being recorded and will be linked to from the Center for Cities website. So if you do need to step away, please know that you can do so without missing a moment of this really important conversation. On behalf of the Windsor Law Center for Cities, I want to welcome and begin this community conversation in the shared screen for the shared land. I want to begin acknowledging that we are on the traditional territory of the Three Fires Confederacy of the First Nations, which include the Ojibwa, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi. The river and the land sustain us. I also want to welcome our team of speakers and thank them so much for being here and spending the time and for the work that they bring to this community. We are here because we want to heal the community, we want to protect our communities, and we want to make our communities healthier and stronger. We are here because we want to talk about the future we want, and that is a future of a post-pandemic healthy city. The World Health Organization defines a healthy city as one that is continually creating and improving those physical and social environments and expanding those community resources which enable people to mutually support each other in performing all the functions of life and developing to their maximum potential. Before we get started, I do want to just hand over the virtual microphone to Annika, just for some few comments before we get started.
Hi everyone and welcome. I'll be very brief. My name is Annika Smith and I'm the first director of the new Windsor Law Center for Cities. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. Our center was launched in the fall of 2019, so we're not even at our first anniversary yet. Given the pandemic, we haven't even had a chance to have a proper launch and have you all in the same room to celebrate with us. But we are here. Our goal is twofold. Is one, to be a voice on law and policy in national urban and urbanist conversations, and second, to be a place where these kinds of conversations can take place in our local community. In particular, we're interested in encouraging conversations around inclusion and sustainability in our cities, and I think that fits the mandate for today very, very well. So I want to thank all of our panelists for being eager participants in this somewhat experimental format today. We're going rapid fire through. We want to get lots of voices on the table. This is a really sort of key moment for our city and for cities generally, where there's a lot of creative ideas floating around and also I think an increased understanding of just how many different voices need to be at the table to make the kinds of decisions we need to make. And so we're looking forward to the conversation today. Thanks so much, and thanks to all of our sponsors as well.
Okay, thank you. So what does a healthy city mean to the residents of those of Windsor? So let's find out together. We're going to forego speaker bios because our speakers are so accomplished that it is likely that even if we hit all the highlights, it would eat up the 3 minutes of their allotted time. We do have a page that lists our speakers and their bios, and we're going to share that link in the chat. Speaking of chat, if anyone in the audience has a question for our speakers or in a speaker in particular, add your question to the chat. We'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourself and ask a question in person if you'd like at the end of all these sessions, or if you prefer, I can read the questions on your behalf. And we're going to try to address these, as many of these as possible. Before we begin, we're just about to start. I'd just like to ask everyone but our first speaker to please mute their microphones. We've got a lot of wonderful things to talk about. So I would like to first ask our first speaker, Hugo Vega from the YMCA of Southern Ontario, to unmute their microphone, and so we can begin. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So there's a slide I think that's going to come up in a minute. So what I've done is I've adapted recommendations from a UN climate change report that can be added to any litmus test for equity-related work, be it grassroots policy or system transformation, with local examples on impact on immigrants. I propose that the local strategies and I think the slide's coming up now, requires equity of impact across 3 key dimensions. Number 1, intergenerational equity. So meaning policies and solutions that are good for everyone in our current generation, as well as being good for future generations. Local examples include the Cradle to Career approach of Prosper Us, coordinated by United Way, and the City of Windsor's Pathway to Potential and Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. This kind of work can help first-generation newcomers break away from poverty, which they are overrepresented in. Remarkably, second generations tend to change this trend, but generational poverty remains a reality for many. The second dimension is that of international or cross-border equity. So understanding how local decisions impact people, resources, and environments internationally. From externalities of globalization to the migrant workers, refugee claimants, international students, and temporary foreign workers in our communities, there are plenty of case studies. The third dimension is national application equity, so meaning that laws and policies, even if fair and just, must be applied fairly to all. So Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, and Indigenous movements continue to expose the disparities in applications of policies on marginalized communities. This includes economic barriers when we look at the mismatch of employment opportunities afforded to newcomers against their educational levels. Living in one of the most diverse communities in Canada, I really believe that we are sitting on a goldmine of talent, skills, and innovation that we are grossly underutilizing. Worse, their unique perspectives could hold the key to solving many of the issues of our time, including climate change, so we need to bring them forward. These 3 dimensions can only be achieved if we practice procedural and distributive justice, meaning full participation in decision-making and equitable ownership of the benefits and outcomes. The Windsor-Essex Local Immigration Partnership is a great example of a collective of champions across sectors that is pushing for this kind of procedural change, with much success in adding newcomer voices in local strategies for transportation, housing, employment, and health. But if we're being honest, these might be exceptions. Most of us know we have a really long way to go, and all of this has to amount to a need for a significant cultural shift. For this and other reasons, our YMCA tries to push the envelope on all of these principles. Currently, we're leading the We Value Partnership, a national pilot project that seeks to revolutionize the newcomer serving sector through technology and service delivery innovation to capture and leverage the capacities, the skills, the talents, and the aptitudes of newcomers. We've engaged over 50 partners in education, employment, health, government, and community services. And together we're trying to do the hard work of changing systems, perceptions, and outcomes towards fair and equitable representation for newcomers in all aspects of our Windsor-Essex community. I've included links to all noted initiatives and invite you to consider getting involved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hugo. Our next speaker is Jeremiah Bowers. Could I ask him to unmute, reveal yourself?
Hello, folks. So I'm obviously coming from a unique youth perspective, and obviously the issues of racism in our community can be condensed to 3 to 4 minutes, but I shall do my best and highlight 3 important considerations, particularly for Black youth and community in Windsor. It's important to recognize that we can never truly transition into a post-pandemic healthy city without also finding solutions to recover from the inequities affecting the most marginalized and vulnerable by gaps in our healthcare system. So I'll be focusing on 3 points. So 1 is a Black youth strategy in the city. A Black youth strategy needs to be formulated that removes stigma around quote unquote Black youth at risk, and centers Black youth voices and agency in issues including education, student housing, and employment. Youth can't be talked at, but must be invited to the table using modern means of social media. Black youth must be put in positions to lead from the front and provided the resources to make the change they wish to see on issues today, rather than get wrapped in things like task forces that set their sights several years down the line. 2 is community group consultations. We have several amazing Black community organizations right here in Windsor. They must be engaged more in key issues and empowered to make decisions rather than simply serve in advisory roles. They must have decision-making roles in community services, including mental health, housing, policing, and the criminal justice system, while recognizing that the latter is a broader provincial issue. Point is, Black communities in Windsor continue to be underserved by existing community support systems. The pathway to fixing this is to serve as proactive and long-term allies to Black folks, empowering those folks and those organizations to lead the charge from the front, rather than from behind or on the side. The third is Black youth and local education. So in a post-secondary campus context, Windsor has among the most Black students per capita in the province. Yet Black, Indigenous, and other students of color are more likely to face academic discipline than their white counterparts. We're not represented in faculty ranks, staff positions, or senior administrative roles. The little representation we do have among faculty is relied upon to do all of the anti-racist work themselves, only to have their institutional knowledge and lived experiences disregarded by the institution or not compensated at all. The same can be said of city leadership and staff. When we don't have people who look like us and relate to our experiences, yet are key decision makers in issues that directly affect us, Black youth then feel there is no place for them, especially in the politics that's responsible for laws that often violently and disproportionately impact them, nor in the seats of higher learning that often tokenizes or treats them as the exception rather than the norm. So it's insufficient for our city, and especially our local education community, to simply be not racist. The question is, when Black and Indigenous youth are falling through the cracks in all aspects of city life, how will you be proactively anti-racist? We're past the point of acknowledging that systemic racism and discrimination pervades every fabric of our community, from education to healthcare. The data and evidence is already there, so we know it exists. Now the institutions, organizations, and businesses in our city must drop the buzzwords, drop the PR statements, and instead focus on meaningful, sustainable steps that take this from protest to policy. Not tomorrow, not in next year's budget. The movement, the Black Lives Matter movement specifically, has been here for generations. And so incrementalism this time won't cut it. Now is the moment for us to invest our dollars, our resources, and our actions in the health, safety, and education of Black people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremiah. Our next speaker comes from the Hotel Dieu. It's Janice Caffer. Could I ask her to?
I'm ready.
Wonderful, thank you. You have the floor.
Thank you very much for having me on the panel for today's event. I'm honored to be the president and CEO of Hotel Dieu Grace Healthcare, which, if you don't know, it's a post-acute care hospital and more public hospital in West Windsor. Our hospital is like many others, providing services in the area of rehabilitation, complex medical care, palliative care, and tertiary mental health. And additionally, we have a significant footprint in outpatient and community services in both rehabilitation, restoration, and mental health and addictions. And we finally are the lead agency for children's mental health in Windsor, Essex. Additionally, I'm the co-chair for the Prosper Us initiative that Hugo mentioned earlier, which is a collective impact approach adopted in Windsor, Essex in order to address child poverty in our community. And it's from that perspective informed by these two roles that I occupy that I bring my comments today. I've been asked to talk for 3 to 4 minutes max on a number of topics that should realistically take us 3 to 4 weeks or longer, but I'm always up for a challenge. So let's talk about health through a lens of inclusion, public health, and economic rejuvenation. I'm not here to give anyone advice. So if that's what you're here for, I'm sorry to disappoint you. What I can talk about is what I see, what I know, and what I worry about in health service delivery if we don't pay attention to those big topics I mentioned. There are realities in healthcare that we're seeing now, that we've seen in the healthcare system for generations, and what I really hope we don't see in the coming generations. So some things that I know. Poverty is a health crisis. Racism is a health crisis. Economic inequality is a health crisis. Mental illness in our community is a health crisis, but we don't talk about these. We do talk about healthcare a lot. We talk about how proud we are of our publicly funded healthcare system, and that's right, and it's proper. We have a lot to be proud of. We talk about our wonderful reality that we don't get billed when we go into the emergency department. We share with our US friends that we don't go bankrupt when we need surgery, and we tweet about free flu shots. And sometimes we complain and share our frustrations that we can't get into our doctor on the same day, or we have to wait a long time for knee surgery. But what we don't talk about is important. We don't talk about the folks that can't fill their prescriptions because they can't afford to do that and pay the rent or buy groceries. We don't talk about the way people experiencing homelessness are treated when they access healthcare. We don't talk about how Black, Indigenous, people of color have different health outcomes than white Canadians when they seek care. We don't talk about children who have mental health issues who are waiting for months and months for treatment while parents are sleepless worrying about them. We don't talk about children who are experiencing homelessness and living in hotels. We don't talk about the knowledge that many of us have that healthcare is not equal, even though it's universal and publicly funded. Unlike the US, we don't pay for some of our healthcare out of pocket, but despite that, our system really does discriminate against the poor, the vulnerable, and the marginalized. So what can we do? It's so big, what can we do? We can advocate for community health and investments in what we call the social determinants of health. We can learn about the impacts of poverty on health. We can volunteer with organizations that are trying to and make an effective change, like Prosper Us. We can, honestly, we can give a damn. And what does this have to do with post-pandemic leadership? Well, we have evidence, lots of it actually now being shared, that COVID has had a disproportionate impact on the poor, on neighborhoods already facing economic inequality and high rates of racial segregation, on communities with lower rates of employment. And here in Windsor, Essex, there are neighborhoods where we knew we needed to do more before COVID. I know that post-COVID, we will need to apply ourselves even more urgently to assist families, and particularly children, to address the inequitable impact of the pandemic. 3 neighborhoods in particular need our collective concern: West Windsor, Downtown Windsor, and Leamington. Those are the neighborhoods identified by Prosper Us as priority neighborhoods, and in these areas, all of us need to apply our collective efforts in bridging the gaps. As I sign off, I remind you of one of our key responsibilities at Hotel June: mental health and addictions, and particularly children's mental health. So check out our work with CMHA to open a rapid assessment center. I'm posting an infographic with my remarks for your information. And as a mom, as a grandmother, as a nurse and CEO, I am committed to creating a healthier community for all of our children, and I hope some of you choose to apply yourself to this goal as well. Thank you for your time and attention today and for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Janice. I almost had to flash my red card, but you brought it in on time. You brought it home. I appreciate it. This is so wonderful. Could I have Sarah Woodruff Atkinson from the University of Windsor's Faculty of Human Kinetics please show yourself with your screen and join us, please?
Oh, can you see me?
We can see you, we can hear you.
Okay, good, okay. Thank you very much again for having me. It's tough to follow Janice's comments right there, but as she said, I'm speaking from what I know. And so during these unprecedented times, stress is at an all-time high. People are worried about their work, their employment, finances, isolation, contracting the virus, among other things. And even though physical activity is known to help reduce the effect of stress, the local parks, rec centers, gyms, and trails have all been closed. So what are people to do? The most common form of physical activity among Canadian adults is walking. Yet Windsor isn't known for its walkability, with a walk score of 42 indicating it's mainly car dependent. In fact, the city center and Walkerville areas are the only 2 neighborhoods that are considered very walkable. Prior to the pandemic, Windsorites were also considered less physically active and more sedentary compared to the rest of Ontario, which alone does not set us up for a very healthy community. As a researcher, we've been following a group of adults, mainly Canadians from Windsor, who regularly wear an activity tracker like a Fitbit or an Apple Watch since the start of the pandemic. We know that people who wear a Fitbit or these activity trackers are probably a little bit more active than the general population. So while our results aren't necessarily reflective of the larger population, we can garner some information. So during the month of March, when the pandemic hit, people reduced their step count by about 1,000 steps per day from pre to post self-isolation or quarantine. We also noticed that the decrease in physical activity was more prevalent among those with higher work-related stress. And so for the study itself, we're following people for the next 6 months to see how stress, physical activity, and sedentary behavior changes over time with the reopening up of our communities. And so just this past month, participants told us that the most popular form of physical activity was walking, running coming in second, and home-based circuit type training in the third spot. So trying to translate that to what we can do and get more people active, we've seen cities like Toronto, Vancouver, Calgary, Winnipeg, and others all modify their existing road infrastructure for more pedestrian and bike-friendly activities. A couple of weeks ago, I publicly gave my support to the closing of the 2 lanes on Riverside Drive, just 3 kilometers in the downtown core, to allow for more pedestrians to be active while physically distancing. This motion was shot down at City Council, with Mayor Drew Dilkins stating that putting up barriers and redirecting cars would be too costly. He also stated that there are 135 kilometers of trails in Windsor if people wanted to use them. But have you ever used any of the trails in Windsor? Well, they're getting better, and I'm more than thankful that the Dougal death trap has recently been addressed, because it's in my own neighborhood. But my concern is that the trails often lead to nowhere or are connected by very busy streets. And so one of my suggestions would be to consider how the existing trail systems work to build upon what's already there to make more an interconnected pathway system. We also need to consider the accessibility of the trails, as for instance, they tend to be concentrated in areas of higher socioeconomic status, and those disadvantaged may not have as much access. We've had Open Streets Windsor operate for the past 2 summers, whereby they shut down 8 kilometers of street for the day. Couldn't we bring that back much more regularly, say on the weekends, like they're doing in Toronto? In my world of health promotion, we'd like to say, make the healthy choice the easy choice, or an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Wouldn't it be ideal if we could put some efforts into health promotion and prevention for once? What if everyone would have access to the trail system right from their own neighborhoods, so that they too could get active, strengthen their immune system, and reap the benefits of a physically active lifestyle? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I would like to ask Judy and McCalla to join us.
Hi, thanks for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. Unlike everyone else, my area of expertise is not in health or education. I designed and crafted custom event stationery, specifically wedding stationery. And as such, my business has been significantly impacted by COVID. My studio is located downtown Windsor. Right now, my weddings would be, at this point, would be really busy. We'd be designing day of stationery. We'd be doing weddings for the fall. Right now, everything has been postponed till the, next year right now. I've had to lay off the person that would help me during the spring and the summer. And being a really small business, the funding that's coming from the business basically is not available to me. I still have to make payments on my rents and printers and everything that I'm using for my business. As before COVID, I was already lost in the wedding industry, because being one of the only Black female entrepreneurs, there was no representation whatsoever. Like, there was no photographers, there's no makeup artists representing Black people. If you look on their websites, there's no Black couples. When I call like makeup artists, they'll say, you know, you'd have to bring your own foundation because we've never done a blackface before. And that's disheartening. If you can't see yourself on a website or in somebody's portfolio, that's disheartening to you, and you don't want to go to that business. So what can we do? Basically, right now we lack resources and networks. So we just need those equal access. I've had to fight for everything I've had. I have a beautiful studio. I pretty much had to fight for it for myself. I've never had somebody helping me along the way. And so right now it would be beneficial to have, I think the way to move forward is to have sponsorships. And when I say sponsorship, I don't mean charity, I don't mean money. I mean people like basically using your social capital to get lead generations, help us with marketing, introduction to publications that will showcase our work, include us in cross marketing promotions or digital promotions, showcase our work on your social media platforms. I think beyond COVID, people, and beyond like all the protesting, people should support not just any business, but Black businesses. We really need you at this point, and it should not be about optics, but really about an opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jadine. Next up is a neighbor of yours, of sorts, from Craft Head Brewing, is Brian Daytalk, please.
How's it going, everyone? Brian here from Craft Heads Brewing. What does the service industry need from city, council, and administration? There's three things that kind of want to highlight is cooperation, clarity, and the ability to move swiftly. First, cooperation. Like we've seen from last night's unanimous council vote on the use of sidewalks, parking, and extended patios to help small businesses, especially those in the service industry. We need the city, council, and admin to work with the businesses to solve problems rather than giving just no as an answer. The second point is clarity. We need to know what the next steps are, what the expectations are, and when and if we enter stage 3, and give businesses as much time to prepare and put them in the best position to succeed. Lastly, we need to move swiftly. Now more than ever, every second matters for these businesses. So being able to expedite decisions and cut through red tape for approvals and get answers will help these businesses. Like our motto here at Craft Heads, it's time to be adventurous and try new things. There isn't really a better time to experiment and live beyond the boundaries that have held us back for a really long time. We really need to think outside of the box, and I hope that we, as in the city, council, admin, and small businesses, can learn from both the positive and negative opportunities that have presented themselves during this time. Thanks and cheers.
Cheers. Also from downtown, can I ask Vincent Georgi from the University of Windsor SOCA and WIF to take the screen, please?
Thanks, Mita. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I wear two hats, so I'll speak to both of them. The first piece, as the leader of WIF, I go back to 2016, when in the Capitol Theater we showed a film called Migrant Dreams. And this is about the abused workers who are working in corporate greenhouses in our county. And at that screening, we had about 40 of the workers come to the screening and be there and have a powerful, heavy, challenging, and very necessary conversation with our community about what exactly is going on in that oh so distant place in the county. And it's moments like that that our whole WIF team reminds ourselves this is why we exist, to do just this. Last year, we brought two important films to the community. One was the film Pray, which is about sex abuse scandals by the Catholic Church here in Windsor, things that were still being hidden and not acknowledged in our own community. And we had a very, very powerful conversation in that Capitol Theater again. And we also had the film There's Something in the Water, about environmental racism and the lack of access and equity of Black people to something as basic as clean water in our great country of Canada. And that's thanks to Annika and the Center for Cities that brought that film to us. What concerns me, I think, right now for the climate we're in, WIF just announced this past week that we're not going to run our 2020 festival just based on the realities of COVID and the safety of the community, is for WIF, and I think for a lot of the arts and culture organizations, and many of whom I know are joining the chat today, is where are these crucial conversations happening? Where are these unfiltered conversations going to happen? Where we go after very difficult stories and emotions, and by showing it on screen, you then bring it back into the audience and you speak to it. And I think that's a real concern of all of ours right now, is where are these difficult conversations going to happen? You know, if they're not happening, these giant, well-attended well mediated, lots of media, lots of attention, and that it concerns that these things are going to be silent for a year, and we can't have it. With my SOCA hat on, my concerns are for our student, and the concerns being around their safety and their mental health and their wellness of being our students for the coming year, many of whom are not in a position to have expensive instruments at their home to play music or to paint or live in the spaces where they can practice, or where they don't have multiple roommates, or have, maybe they're a parent and they don't have access to childcare. And how are we actually expecting them to be set up for success when they're just, by the realities of their daily lives, there's only so much they can do? I have a lot of concern around that, and my colleagues and faculty and staff unanimously concerned about that, about how well they can be. I'll give you a final example there, just even specifically with music students, with voice and with breath, that we had conversations around, will music not be allowed? Will singing not even be allowed in the community because of health risk? And these are questions, these are existential questions, you're even asking yourself. Very, very, very difficult. And I just want to put those out there, and I appreciate being here very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm still thinking about, I'm thinking about that last question about the future of singing, and maybe that's definitely going to be a question that maybe if there's going to be a moment of quiet in the chat, I'm going to offer that as a potential discussion item. I have our next speaker. Our next speaker is from the Windsor Islamic Association. Could I have Yusuf to take the screen and the mic, please?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So Muslim community in Windsor, of course, as all of other communities, has been heavily impacted by the pandemic, both on individual and institutional level. It forced us across 5 mosques and 4 full-time schools and multiple other charitable entities and youth education programs to adapt with some of its extreme circumstances. The institutions had to decrease the number of services and the number of community members being served, which was a big challenge, since most of these services are not only religious functions, but they are also including social assistance for family and youth, mental health services, which is very critical and essential for the community in these times, food banks, schools. Also, some institutions laid off some of its employees. Even for sure, the CADA emergency wage subsidy made it a lot easier, but it's still challenging on the long term, especially since all of these institutions are nonprofits. On the positive side, there has been a very positive communication with the local institutions and the city of Windsor, which was really considerate of some of the community requests, including the permission of streaming the adhan, or the call to prayer from mosques at the sunset time during Ramadan last May, which was really something that the community enjoyed at large. But still, some of the things that I think are important and beneficial for the next critical phase moving out from this problem that hit all of our community and all the communities at large. And we are trying to work on, and we hope to get some help from the decision-making local institutions. Some of these things are, we really need to work on more educational workshops and materials for the community that cater towards the Muslim audience, given the nature of the religious functions that mosques and these institutions provide. And also with some of them being in high density of gatherings sometimes. The providing signage for health awareness and safety precautions, it is also something that we look for. And in both of these levels, the educational programs and the signage, we are really hoping to offer these things in multiple languages, given the high diversity of the community. In, for example, the mosque that I'm serving through, we have over 50 different ethnicities and backgrounds of our congregants. Also, most of our institutions have parking lot issues, even before COVID. Some of them are very tight. Plus now, for example, there's construction already at one of the highest traffic buildings that we have that is limiting our capacity a lot, even now more with the imposition of social distancing. During the past few months, we tried to implement some of the some creative ideas how to serve the community in drive-through programs, for example, or in social distancing activities and functions. The parking lot issue was always a problem that we are facing, and now it became much bigger and much more challenging. I think also facilitating finding or providing resources for medical materials for the congregants, employees, the volunteers, given the fact that we serve on a daily basis hundreds of people in our communities. I think this is also a bit of a challenge and a big financial burden that our community is facing as well. Also, as recreational activities, we all can observe that many bikes are hitting the road, and the biking routes and lanes, I think, should be given more attention. And I have this observation myself within our own community, people coming to the mosques or to the schools with their own bikes. And we see in Windsor really, I think this is one of the things that have been underserved a lot, and it needs more attention to facilitate that. Sometimes you notice it to be among our elderly, but now with the new like normal we are going to face towards, we're seeing now a lot of our community members, like across different age groups, we are actually encouraging something like this. So this is also something that we should be paying a lot of attention to. So these are just some points that I thought would be beneficial to share with you, and it's in the core of our discussion with our community nowadays. And thank you.
Oh, and thank you so much. Could I have the next speaker, with Laverne Jacobs from Windsor Law, please?
Hi there. Thank you for the invitation to be here today. I'm really honored to be here. I'm a Black woman with physical disabilities who uses a wheelchair to navigate the city. As a law professor here at the university, my research focuses on disability, equality, and the administrative justice system. I want to take a few minutes to talk about how local decision makers can better consult with people with disabilities as we emerge out of the pandemic and into what's often been called the new normal, one open to many possibilities of change. My starting premise is that thorough consultation with people with disabilities is essential, but although it's essential, it's often not seen as necessary, and this can be a downfall. I'll give you two examples. The first concerns access to personal support workers, often called attendant services. It's an issue that I've been hearing about in different parts of the province, including in Windsor, Essex. Personal support workers from local agencies assist people with disabilities with whatever their specific daily needs of living may be. So this includes grooming, toileting, exercises, meal preparation. Understandably, when the pandemic struck, concerns about having adequate PPE and avoiding the spread of the virus, both to the workers and to the clients, led to a reduction in service hours for many people with disabilities. However, as we learn more through the pandemic and as we're now emerging out of the lockdown, there hasn't been community consultation on how services will be returned, nor in many cases has there been individual discussion. So these are fundamental services that pose a risk to the client and to the service provider, but they're also services that enable people with disabilities to get out into the community. And so people with disabilities need to be at the center of these conversations regarding how the risks will be balanced. And so this is one thing that I think is important. A second example deals with masking. It's clear that going out into the shops will now require wearing a mask. Media reports have noted the consternation felt by excuse me, members of the disability community for whom wearing a mask will affect their physical or mental health issues. One question that arises is whether procedures for assisting people with disabilities to shop who are unable to wear a mask will be provided and what those procedures might entail. And this again requires discussion amongst everyone involved, and people with disabilities should definitely be included. So how do we move forward? I want to introduce to you Chloe, spelled C-L-O-E. Chloe is an acronym that stands for 4 attributes that I think are key to ensuring effective consultation with people with disabilities. Commitment, look, oversight, and enforcement. And I'll just provide a very brief overview. I'm happy to take questions in the Q&A. The practice of consulting with people with disabilities will only start if there is a commitment to doing so. And this commitment has to be more than fleeting. It should be a commitment in writing that is publicly made, such as in a municipal bylaw or a council committee's written terms of reference. The second letter, L, stands for taking a look. And what I mean by that really is relating to the person's experience, the barriers that they face, and asking what's the most considerate way of removing these barriers? How can they be done for many? Oversight is the third attribute, and I think it's necessary to have a group of people with disabilities review proposed plans. I think that a committee should be struck that has a robust role to be able to review a wide range of issues that are of importance to people with disabilities as they emerge. And finally, enforcement is the fourth element of Chloe. I'm not talking about policing, as you know, current and past times have clearly shown us problems with policing. But what I'm suggesting is ways of auditing, especially those who stand to benefit from any power imbalances. So that's all that I have for now. Thank you very much for letting me be part of this conversation.
Sorry, that's apologies. I've got some background music going on. Could I have our next speaker? Could I have Lyra Sheldon please take the virtual screen, please? Lyra.
Hello.
Oh, there you are. I can hear you now. I can see you now. Excellent.
Thank you. I'd first like to give a big thank you to Professor Smith for inviting me and to everyone for including me and allowing me to be a part of the discussion. I'm 17 years old. I'm a student, and I believe it's extremely important in discussions like these to include younger voices, especially on issues that greatly affect their future. One of these issues being climate change. One of the biggest things I've learned in speaking with my peers is that no one has to convince young people that climate change and other environmental problems are a pressing issue. The issue comes in convincing us, myself included, that we can make an impact. Even if we're below voting age, there is power in direct action, community organizing, and youth-driven initiatives. However, much of that can be facilitated through opening discussions like these to make it accessible and easy for youth from a variety of backgrounds to voice their opinions and be heard. On a personal note, I graduated yesterday. I'm going to the University of Ottawa for the foreseeable future, but I've been thinking a lot about where I want to live in the long term. One of the factors that affects that decision is the choices municipalities are making to make a greener, more sustainable community. Coming out of lockdown especially, we have the opportunity to take this sense of community and mutual support that has come out of the pandemic, showing us the importance of supporting locally and investing in our communities, and make changes that will have a positive impact on our lives and on the lives of future generations in Windsor and Essex County. Locally, I believe that means investing in a better and more accessible public transit system, better and more accessible community health and mental health services, investing in arts and culture, making firm policy changes to dismantle the effects of systemic racism in our local community, and creating more green space and walkable areas for families to gather, especially in the downtown area. It means continuing to support locally and building a more vibrant, livable Windsor for everyone in it. Thank you again, and I hope to see more youth voices elevated and included in future discussions.
Thank you so much, Lyra, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Could I have Edwin Tam please take the screen and the microphone?
Hello, Mita, can you hear me?
Absolutely, I can see you too.
Great. I think that we're going to bring up the slides that I prepared. Is that correct?
I will.
Yeah, it's Annika here. I'm just jumping in, make sure that that Michael can get them up for you. If you can start, Edwin, and we'll get those ready for you right away.
Sure, okay. So thanks very much, everybody. And I'd like to acknowledge my fellow group members here. Annika is actually on the group as well as my colleagues from engineering and from math, and obviously the support from WeSpark. Just waiting for that first slide. Great, yeah, Michael, if you could go to the next slide, that's fine. Right, so what are we doing? Our group was put together to look at a sort of an interesting research and sort of general question in which some of you have already raised, like Sarah and Lyra talked about the city. And the idea is how resilient is infrastructure with respect to pandemic management? And we know from the news that pandemic impacts have varied by country and even by city. And it's hard to say that simple characteristics such as city size and population size explain all the differences. They don't. There are some unique factors. And so are there specific municipal characteristics that allow a community to first withstand the pandemic and then return to some sort of functionality faster? As we've said, you know, it's not the normal, it's a new normal, but at least some sort of functional state. Can we get the next slide, please, Mike? So what's the context? First of all, cities and the community are the level which we interact. Nations and provinces will set the big picture, but then we have to figure out how we do that. And of course, we realize that there's a difference. Like large cities like Montreal, they experienced some of the worst outbreaks, but at the same time, assuming everything else is running, they have the resources to, say, withstand a pandemic. Small communities, the rural communities, they don't want you there because they're more likely going to get it because they're concerned that if they do get it, they're going to be overwhelmed. And we saw the situation out in Alberta with the meat packing communities. We also had on this idea that there's a municipal state of emergency for governments. And of course, we know a lot of cities have enacted climate change emergencies, which allows them to focus. So how does this all play into this thing? Well, as we've heard from a number of people, different demographic groups interact differently with municipal infrastructures and systems. And vulnerable populations, or those, say, with lower income, depend significantly on infrastructure systems and services. So transit is the best, is one of the best examples. Do we, for example, shut transit down? Do we limit transit? Because those are possible ways that we can transmit the disease. But of course, then people that will be impacted differently, and some may not have the options that those of us, say, with vehicles do have. But there's a few other interesting dynamics. For example, unlike an environmental disaster, in this case, assuming everything is running, we can choose how to govern a system. That doesn't usually happen. If we have a flood and a roadway is taken out or the power is taken out, we have to deal with it, and it can be unpredictable. But now we have some choices. And we heard a lot about, like Sarah, for example, walkable cities. So you know, these all start to come into play in terms of the infrastructure. Interesting example, which was just brought up to me, is heat crisis and heat alerts. Municipalities generally advise their citizens to go to large public facilities with air conditioning and commercial establishments. We don't have that option during this pandemic. So that adds another interesting dimension. And of course, the situation is, what if a major system is also disrupted? Can you imagine going through the last 16 weeks if power was shut off on a constant basis, if clean drinking water was disrupted? It would be a completely different, and I'd say much more significantly harder challenge to cope with. So the idea is what we're trying to do is figure out, are there preferred characteristics or actions by municipalities and its populations to improve their resiliency to respond and to recover from future pandemic scenarios? Last slide, please, Michael. And so we can think about it in a few ways. And I use this 3 diagram saying my background is sustainability. So let's go with 3. So we have infrastructure, systems and services, governance in terms of management and regulations, and community in terms of population groups and dynamics. So what are we seeing here? The infrastructure, the intersection between infrastructure and governance tells us what is, say, maybe acceptable or permittable. The intersection between infrastructure and community tells us what might be viable or possible. So viable or feasible. But the intersection between governance and community but then may tell us what is equitable or fair. And so when we intersect all these 3, we have the idea that, hey, maybe our infrastructure then is truly resilient, both during a pandemic and after pandemic, and the way the world is going, probably future pandemics. That's all I have. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Edwin. We have our next speaker is Elaine Isaacs. I know you're here. Yes, I can see you. I can hear you. You have the floor.
So my name is Elaine Isaacs. I'm from Onyadaag. I work here at Southwest Ontario Aboriginal Health Access Centre as Integrated Care Manager. Coming to this panel is not a comfortable position for me, especially being so emotionally charged and knowing and experiencing everything I've done raising my own children here in the community. But I always strive to make a better place. And I believe it begins with this, And our Indigenous culture and ways, we talk about we have to come together with one mind, one good mind. These are from the, our great law of peace information that dates back for centuries, that we have to gather together under the tree of peace and bring our minds together as one to solve what it is that we need to do to make a better future for our children. And our ancestors always talk about that. We have to take a look at the past. Our ancestors, 7 generations, thought about where we are today and did all they can to improve the lives. If that means that, coming from another country to come to Canada, we welcomed you. But at the same time, we have to take a look at what are we going to do together to make a better future for Canada. And the Indigenous people, like all of you have said, tend to be the forgotten voice or pushed aside, or tokenism. I've sat on many community board of directors, CAS, City of Windsor Race Relations Committee, many ad hoc committees, always striving to make a better place. More recently, I've had the City of Windsor Police, probably only because we have this movement, and thank you to our Black brothers and sisters, the Black Lives Matters, that also highlighted again the injustices to our Indigenous people and the racism that exists right here in Windsor. So I've had Windsor Police Chief participant ask me to join their advisory council that they're beginning to do. I supported the City of Windsor Police, and I supported the city throughout a lot of tasks that they've underwent. And I was really happy to hear when they went on a very large commitment to take a look at their own policing force and the systematic racism that happens and what they can do to make a better place. And I remember going to many graduating cadets. I'm sorry, I don't know the proper terminology. Always looking, where's our Indigenous representation? Always sharing to anyone I meet that our community needs to reflect who we are. And we're a very multicultural community. And Indigenous, we do have a large Indigenous population here. And I never see our people reflected in these institutions. So I thank the city, or I thank the University of Windsor for the initiative they took to ensure that there's Indigenous folks hired in each department. And that is why I'm here, thanks to my sister, beautiful woman, Bev Jacobs, who encouraged me to participate. Again, we're always the forgotten voice, and it's so easy to go within our own institutions to look for the help that we need to get us through this next event we need to do. But remember the community folks, or the Indigenous community folks that are living and breathing and have a voice to be heard. And I want to thank our Jeremiah and Janice for sharing about the health inequities. And that's why SOHAC exists here. And we're continuing to grow and expand. And through COVID, yes, we've been reacting. And yes, we had to find new ways to adapt to support our community with all of the regulations required. We are, since May 12th, we started screening any First Nations person and testing any First Nations person that think they may have COVID. Because yes, we are a vulnerable population group. So we've been very busy here trying our best to adapt. It's been very difficult. Our community members always are looking for our elders. And some of our elders are in the United States that travel to this community, and they're shut down by these borders that never existed to us as Indigenous people. And going back to your opening words, you talk about this land being the land of the Anishinaabe Nation, the Three Fires Society. I'd like to share with you that this land that we're standing and breathing on right now is a territorial land. There was an agreement made. There's a wampum belt that acknowledges the unique relationship that the Haudenosaunee, our nation, the Iroquois nation, have with the Anishinaabe nation. It's called the Dish with One Spoon territory. So in our oral history, this is Dish with One Spoon territory. So again, it's those voices, like who's the loudest person to come to the forefront to say, this is our place, this is our land. A lot of times our voices are shut down or not heard. And I know there was a young lady that came to the university that expressed and tried to share our oral history, and even had the support of our chiefs, our traditional longhouse chiefs, to help Canadians understand the true history of the land that we're currently calling Windsor. That's one piece, but the more important piece is, as we move forward, how do we ensure that the Indigenous voices are heard? And I felt, I've been in this community 30 years and sat on a number of committees. I feel tired. And you hear that with all of our, the Black Panthers elders, and the ones that have been in the movement for years. we get tired. We try, we share. We feel like we're a token. And really, our health matters. And I just want to talk about a positive thing that happened in this community. Eddie Francis, a past city mayor, was one, and the city of Windsor was one of many, I shouldn't say many, one of few municipalities throughout Canada that supported the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. And I remember being there when he signed that document in Windsor. And I felt honored, and I thought, wow, we're going to make positive change. Yet every one of us, well, not every one of us, but a lot of us mentioned the United Declarations, right? And how far have we came with supporting the Indigenous people in that? So it's right here. It's the words that the world has come to, the World Health Organization's talked about that. We need to be respected, honored. We need to ensure that the health, the mental wellness of our Indigenous communities is supported by each and every one of you. It's not a sidebar. It's not a token person at the table. Just like our Black lives, our young Black youth that shared his voice, it's about truly supporting and honoring and giving us that space and supporting what it is that we know what our needs are. And that's why SOHAC exists, because we have the ability to support, we have a right to support our community the best way that we see fit. And it's been difficult when some of our elders aren't able to come and visit our community. It's been difficult when I can't go to my own reserve to participate in my spiritual ceremonies because there's borders. So it's been a very trying time for us, but we are resilient. If you take a look and you've learned any of the history of what Indigenous people in Canada and the United States have been through, we are still thriving, we are resilient, and we will continue to support you as a collective because we have our teachings that we're all one of the Creator's children, right? Every one of us are represented in that medicine wheel that you'll see right in downtown Toronto, right? All of us are one children, and we all will come together under that tree of peace with one collective voice to support the future of this city, province, country, and more importantly, the world. Yahweh miigwech. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We have two more speakers. We have Deirdre Richer. You just need to, wonderful.
Thanks so much for having me here. I'm actually here to learn just as much as I am to say anything. So we do real estate, and we kind of represent a lot of people who are either moving new to Windsor or are coming back after leaving for a long time, like I did myself. And a lot of different things are bringing people back to Windsor, and our job and what we want to do is keep people here. And in order to do that, Windsor can help us in a few ways. And there's certain things that are really, really important to, these highly skilled workers who really do want to change and help make Windsor a better place going forward, especially since the pandemic. And one thing that's really huge for us is the walkable neighborhoods, as we've been speaking about, green space, and really making our cities human-centric and accessible for everyone. A lot of people who come here are just amazed at how bad the public transit system really is, and how bad, like how little bike lanes there are. We have clients who really have to live in a part of the city where they can walk everywhere to restaurants and grocery stores and bike to work, and we have a hard time placing them. And that's something that we're really passionate about changing. So walkable neighborhoods, public transit, and then another one is arts and culture. And really in having the city invest in arts and culture, again, that are open and accessible to everyone. We love, and our clients love, that there's the symphony downtown, and our little art galleries, and that's really important for us. And another thing is opportunities to engage with policymakers. So we have a lot of younger people who are interested in coming back here after school in Toronto and developing and starting. They're young architects, and they just feel like their voices can't be heard. So for us, it's just really important to create these situations where they can, have a meeting with somebody in the planning department. And, before something is just designed and there are all these arbitrary rules, they can actually speak about what they need and what they feel their community would need in order to discuss that with the city before the rules are already written. And so for us, what's really important is that the city create a master plan, and not just a plan that's good for the next 5 or 10 years, but that the city creates a 50-year master plan where they listen to, they listen to everybody, even the quiet voices in the city, and that might take 5 years to collect all of those different, opinions and needs and put them all together, rather than doing the design first and then asking everybody to speak up later. So as a lot of people are moving to Windsor, or have been, because of the affordability in comparison to bigger cities like Toronto, but as our affordability decreases, which we're seeing in the market, Windsor really has to step up and offer a lot of extras to the people who are choosing Windsor versus, Toronto or BC or other cities. And for us, it's really important that, they're listening to, you can hear all my emails coming in. They're listening to, newcomers, people who've been here for ages, and just making it a more inclusive discussion. And we have lots of ideas, even like using vacant buildings, we can set up resources for people to walk by and have their voices heard and discuss how they interact with their city. And, things like buying a home and where you buy your home and where we are placing certain people all needs to come together. And it's a huge piece that we feel that the city really hasn't been listening to. Sarah Sipkar was one of the ones who helped bring small scale development, as a big topic to Windsor, and the planning department was there, and it was really interesting to kind of sit down and feel like they were listening to people. But that's just really the beginning of how much the city has to help us to redesign everything. And COVID and the pandemic is, in our opinion, the perfect opportunity to do that.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to make sure my alarm doesn't go off there. I love what you said about having all voices, including quiet voices. I thought that was wonderful. I've actually, I regret saying that. There was a lot of wonderful words from everyone, and we have our last speaker who I'm going to hold off editorializing just for one more moment. We have from Workforce Windsor Essex, Julian Villafuente. Is he here? I thought I saw him. Yay! Hello, welcome.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. So I think, so I'll be speaking a little bit about the role that employment might play in the development of a healthy city. I think most people would agree that it plays an important role, specifically employment that not only matches the demands of our economy that is in basically upheaval, but also employment that is meaningful and fulfilling to everybody who is involved in the workforce. So how are we doing in that regard right now? Obviously, COVID-19 has deeply impacted, and in very disproportionate ways, how folks are faring in terms of the economy and in terms of employment. Our region, Windsor, the most recent unemployment figure for our area was 16.7%, which is the highest rate of any city in Canada. Since the beginning of the crisis, we have lost a total of almost 32,000 jobs. Since the beginning of the pandemic, at least a third of jobs in sales and service were lost, and at least a third of jobs in manufacturing and utilities. So as shown by the data, there's a clear pattern of jobs most impacted by the COVID-19 crisis, that they are overall lower paying, less skilled, and disproportionately occupied by people of color, young people, and by women. The nature of work as a result of this pandemic has been accelerating rapidly. We're seeing more automation and more need for use of technology and development of technology that is changing the nature of the kind of work that needs to be done. And as a result, participating in the post-COVID-19 economy is increasingly becoming out of reach for people who are currently out of work. So it's a strange paradox that existed before our pandemic and is now accentuated of growing unemployment and growing skill shortages. So this is something that we need to address as a community and as a nation if we want to have a just recovery for everyone. And yeah, I wish I could say that the solution was as simple as investing in the skills of the future. Unfortunately, it's not. a lot of people on this panel already have discussed how there's several basic building blocks of our society that aren't there. How can you participate in skills building or employment if you are hungry or food insecure, if you're housing insecure or homeless, if you're facing the impacts of systemic racism as part of your daily life, if you don't have the resources to deal with the physical and mental health repercussions of your situation? There's a lot of work that we need to do just to even get there. So first, as a community, what I would say, I'll leave us with this. I'll be brief in my remarks. First, we need to recognize that these sort of building blocks of housing, safety, mental and physical health, and fulfilling other basic needs are basic prerequisites for a prosperous and equitable recovery, and they will enable other things like education and skills building. But this is something that we've seen systemic disinvestment in people over generations, and this is a system that we need to not accept as being normal, and we need to stop. On this note, for example, questioning things like, for example, why the city of Windsor invests 21% of their budget into police services, whereas only 7% is allocated to community and health and housing services, all while 60% of police calls are for social issues. Second, we need to recognize that in order to develop, this is something that has already been mentioned, so in order to develop systemic solutions, it's absolutely imperative that we meaningfully involve the communities that are most impacted by these impacts, specifically in leadership roles as well, not just as tokenistic participants. And third, systemic change is hard work. Anybody who has the privilege to be feeling in their comfort zone right now, I would encourage to continue to stay out of your comfort zone and continue to question yourself and how you, in your work, amplify the voices of some people and silence the voices of others. Not everybody has the privilege to be in their comfort zone right now, so in solidarity with other people, I would encourage you to stay out of it. Because there's a lot of work to do, and it's going to require a lot of systemic change if we're going to have a healthy and equitable recovery. So I'll leave you with this quote from Greta Thunberg that I heard the other day. I believe the words are truer today than when she said them about a year ago. Now is not the time to worry about what we can or cannot say. Now is not the time to speak politely. Now is the time to speak clearly. Thank you.
Thank you much, Julian. That was a wonderful quote to end our conversation. And I just wanted to thank all the speakers who were wonderful and who distilled so much wisdom and many challenges towards us. Our Q&A is not working in our Zoom interface, and so I am going to be looking and scrolling through the chat. I'm a little terrified about how this is going to go. Annika might have to rescue me. One of the challenges, of course, is that everything is multifaceted, and we've approached everything in a very simple, in a many multifaceted way. I guess. I'll be selfish and I'll just start with a very short question, and then I want to get very much a question from our attendees.
Mita, I'll just say, I'll jump in and mine the questions
Thank
for
you.
So yeah, go ahead.
No, just a very simple question about how, and maybe this is in light of just more recent things, how can we make our public spaces more accessible and available to people who need that space for both their physical and their mental health? And if any panelists would like to just unmute themselves and then to speak up, and then whether I give permission for speakers to interrupt, but also if you feel better to hold your hand up or make a comment in the chat, I will also recognize that as well. Can we take over the streets? That's my question. Okay, hearing nothing, I assume yes.
I see Hugo's hand there,
Yeah.
or at least I see
Oh,
Hugo
okay.
muted.
Well, I was hoping someone more adequate would jump in. But one of the things that I thought was really interesting about that question is with the work. I glanced over this in my remarks, but newcomers, it's looking at some data around census tracts, and if you look at the 4 tracts that kind of overlap the downtown core, you're looking at about 60 to 70% immigrants are based in those censuses, and so when municipal planning happens and there's consultation, it's really hard for newcomers to have access to that, to know when that's happening, and to really have their voices. And yet, if you walk around the downtown, you go to the riverfront, most of these public spaces are utilized by newcomers en masse. So I think for them to be able to have real say in those processes is really important. We do some of that work. We try to connect them, and we work with other partners like the DWCC to do that with newcomers. And we've seen them take real ownership and really give different perspectives to municipal planning decisions when they are able to connect with those opportunities. So I think that's a really big part from the newcomer perspective.
Unless there's anyone else that wants to jump in there, let me jump in with a couple of other questions here. And these are actually from Naomi Levitz and her college students, I think St. Clair College, who are joining us as a class today. The timing worked out perfectly. So, and they're working on social justice issues. So it was a great alignment. So some questions that they asked, one is, what does it mean to be healthy as a community? And I know we've heard a number of answers there today, but if there's anyone that would like to jump into that, and how do we each contribute? And I think that's a call we've heard from several too, is in terms of all of us stepping up. This is, we often talk about an all hands on deck in climate work, but I think that applies in a lot of other areas as well. And then I think some of the harder questions, Naomi and her students continue. We've also spoken at length about allyhood and microaggressions. What are some of the ways that harm has been committed for different communities at this time, and who is not hurt? And again, I know we've gone part of the way down that road today, but if anyone would like to jump in with any follow-up there, please do. And just go ahead and speak to, just unmute and jump in, I think, because I'm not sure that the hand raising is working.
Okay, I will jump in. So I'll try my best to address as much as I can. So particularly as it relates to the second, third point or question made regarding how has harm been committed for different communities at this time, and what more can be done. I think it's very important to recognize that while we say we have universal healthcare is not in fact universally equitable for everyone. And so what happens is that a lot of Black and Indigenous folks fall through the cracks. I was just pulling up some stats when I saw the question, just because I thought it'd be useful. But for example, Black women are 43% more likely to die from breast cancer than white women, according to the Black Health Alliance. And that's because they're consistently underscreened. And so when you look at why, in this case, Black folks are dying more or more vulnerable, it has everything to do with systemic anti-Black racism. So we're talking about type of jobs that Black folks end up in. Black folks tend to end up in more precarious lines of work, and obviously those were the hardest hit by the coronavirus. Also happens to where you live, happens to with where you live, income levels, lack of resources, and community support. And so, and all of that isn't just things that just happened. It's all due to years and generations of structures and institutions that were built really to suppress these voices and to oppress these folks and kind of put them into a certain like income category or into a certain status. So that in particular is some of the ways harm has been committed for different communities, is through our healthcare system and not doing right by Black and Indigenous folks. In terms of getting involved, and I'm going to speak entirely from the perspective of believing that we can never have a healthy post-pandemic Windsor without addressing the inequities in our community. They both go hand in hand because those are also those that are hardest hit by the pandemic. And so we can't lift the city up if we're not lifting everyone up, especially those hardest hit, as we move from one stage to the next. And so obviously, as mentioned earlier, taking to the streets is very effective, but it's also about applying pressure to your local politicians, to your business organizations, and really taking the time to learn and unlearn things as it relates to how can we ensure that that everyone is being carried along in an equitable manner. And when you're applying that pressure, then you're pushing to see transformational change at whatever level it is, right? It could be could be at work, it could be at a city level, could be at a institutional level, like at the university, at the college, whatever that is, whatever your sphere of influence is. Do your best to learn about how systemic racism has affected folks there, and see what you can do to change that from your own lens.
Yes, I agree with that. And I've even challenged, this is a municipal focus today, so I've challenged the municipality here to take it upon themselves to make it mandatory that they have every employee, right at the start of hiring, trained, provide cultural sensitivity training, provide those spaces. I've went to the police board and said, you know what, you're looking at a 5-year plan, you need to have cultural sensitivity and training provided to every police officer. I continue to echo that message, and I challenge, if you're going to provide a service to Windsor, then you are there for the people. And first and foremost, it's not a job, it's to provide a service. You are to serve us. And that means respecting us and to understand us and to support us. So I do challenge small wins. You know, I challenge, we experience racism with our local EMS. I challenge them, take some training. Yes, and this is the saying I get all the time, well, you know, we're not all bad apples here, and that is true. But let's take an effort to what can we do together to promote and support an understanding of humankind and relationship building. So not pointing fingers and not being defensive, but taking an actionable commitment to learn about immigrants, minorities, our Black community, and first and foremost, our Indigenous community, whose land you all share and flourish with today.
If I may add to that,
Go ahead.
Okay. Annika, yeah, so a couple things I wanted to add on. To Jeremiah's comments, I think it's really an important conversation that we have to have. That the healthcare system was built by white men, and for a very, very, very long time, up until fairly recently, women, people of color, and individuals who come from Indigenous populations have not been represented in management or in positions of power. And so I think there's an awful lot of work that has to be done in the healthcare system. And I see that Lisa Porter has commented as well on your comment around the breast cancer, and really taking a look at how research is conducted in our country and internationally. And I think it really is representative of some significant issues that need to be unpacked and addressed there. And Elaine, I think your comments are spot on in so many ways. Our hospital has been on a journey to try and really understand what we need to do differently in working with some of our vulnerable populations. And that's a very significant mission for us here at Hotel du Grace. And before we even started talking to the folks at SOHAC, our entire board and our executive leadership team did the Indigenous Cultural Safety Training Program offered through BC. And I've gone deeper into that, into 2 more levels. And you know, when you start to learn and take training, and you open yourself up to new opportunities and new ways of thinking about your own bias and your own way that you've been raised and the ways in which you believe certain things have happened, it gives you a different perspective on how to approach, how to consider changing and offering services, what you need to do differently as a public institution and as an individual. And I think more people should do what Elaine is recommending, because it was tremendously eye-opening for our organization, and it has been very instructive for us, not just with the Indigenous population, but other vulnerable populations, how we need to educate ourselves before we go blindly into a conversation with folks that we have no visibility of what it is their needs might be.
Thank you so much to all three of you. I'm going to jump in just to pass on a question which came from Marion Overholt with the Windsor Laws Clinics, legal clinics. And maybe I'll just expand the question even a bit more, because it's a topic that I think has been covered a little bit today, but would be interested in hearing a bit more. And I'll just say too, I know we're at 1:24. Mita will probably give you some closing instructions before too long, and then anyone who wants to stick around is welcome to do that as well. We don't have the formal or the opportunity to be in a physical room with each other after the event, which is sometimes the most fun part, but we can stick around. And the question has to do with public space. Now, Marion's question is actually about a loss of indoor public space and the fact that there is a real need to provide access, especially for low-income folks with inadequate housing. My add-on question is a separate one, and I'll leave it to folks to respond to whatever they want. And that has to do with public spaces and what needs to be done now. And I think there's been a lot of conversations and a lot of innovating in many cities in terms of bike lanes, pedestrian spaces, public spaces for congregation. And there's also been some criticism in saying that those conversations tend not to take into consideration, again, everyone in our community and thinking about what safe spaces are, and you know, sort of in moving away from car-based transport, what that means for folks for whom public spaces are not always safe. And so I'm just curious, I'll leave it open to anyone to comment, any of our panelists, if you have thoughts on what needs to be done now in Windsor on those spaces.
Maybe just to add to that, there is a summer pandemic, and what I almost want to say winter is coming. Does that help? Is there moments of, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Amita, Annika, it's Edwin. Probably a dangerous space for me to try to make a comment in, that my background isn't urban planning, but from sort of an engineering side, I mean, there's been questions about what we can do, and I think activism is really key. I really liked what our youth have said, and I think it was Lyra. She said nobody has to convince the youth that environmental issues are serious, and that is great to hear. I think what needs to come down is how people place priorities, and to be very blunt, and this may not be a popular, how we evaluate trade-offs. From an engineering point of view, from a physical side of point of view, to a large degree, we can sort of design anything. We can design anything within, there are material and engineering limits, but we can sort of do everything. But then it sort of becomes the trade-offs, right? We have to be aware that we cannot have our cake all the time and eat it too. If we want the walkable spaces, the green spaces, which I personally support, because I think it's very important, we have to recognize that at some point, we might not have the convenience of being able to drive quickly somewhere, right? That's how it is. Now, other areas in the world have adapted this quite well. People often refer to Europe or some places in Asia where they are very used to public transit and that sort of mode of thinking. And we have to come to that mode of thinking. I'm not originally a Windsorite. I came here a number of years ago for the faculty position, and people asked me what I thought of Windsor. And I thought it was very interesting because at the time people said, you know, Windsor seems to have a bit of a chip on their shoulder. And I couldn't figure out why, because we have this city, we're the southernmost city with all this agriculture, industry, a college, a university, and everything else. And right beside, you know, arguably one of the last remaining economic and military superpowers. We should have more than the capability to redefine ourselves and seek our own identity. And sort of what I'm getting at then is if we have this activism, what can we do at the earlier individual from the college students, what can we do individually is that we have to take that ethos and we have to incorporate it into our hard things. So rather than focusing on what we can fix now, which is sort of a temporary measure, we have to design from the out front. In engineering, we call this design for environment, design for sustainability, whatever you want. There's always a term that's the catch of the day. But here you have to incorporate that space. So if we look at the larger comment of how do we increase the indoor space, you know, those areas can be designed and planned, but we have to think about what we are giving up in the interim. And are we okay with that? And the youth generation may be perfectly fine with that. But there might be other situations where we have to accept that there may be some other limitations. As the generations progress, people will think differently. And I think that's the point. People will think differently. And those indoor spaces can be useful. I think the important thing is the spaces need to be flexible, right? We can use them for multiple things. When we don't have a pandemic, what can the indoor space be used for? Can it be quickly converted into that kind of space? Can it be quickly adapted? So those systems, that flexibility needs to be engineered from design and forefront. As opposed to, let's say, as sort of a bit of an immediate reaction, let's just design a big box so that people can go safely. Well, that's great. But then the other 300 days of the year, maybe when it's not being utilized, what is its potential then, right? And how does it integrate? Can it kind of thing? And one other thing that Annika knows is that we've been championing is sort of what I would call maybe a community level response, as opposed to the entire city having to deal with everything en masse. Can we literally have more identifiable communities with their own food sources, like the community gardens, their own sort of waste treatment, their own sort of electrical generation? And what this helps then do is it helps decentralize our needs, and what it creates is creates some redundancy, right? If 2/3 of the city is affected, but 1/3 of the city is not, that means we still have some capacity to deal with things. So it's sort of a fundamental rethink in design and how we look at these issues. And of course, this ties into almost everything. But I like what Deidre said about why we attract people, and I think those are the types of things, like Richard Florida and his city, all those types of discussions. Those are all critical.
I'm going to jump in with one last question and then turn the floor over to Mita, and I'll ask your indulgence. I know it's 1:30. I think we started 4 minutes late. Obviously, if anyone needs to go, we appreciate the time you've been able to dedicate today already. But Sarah Sivkar's question is a positive one, and I like the tone that it ends us on. And she says, in addition to saying really excellent job, everyone, and I think we all echo that, I appreciated how multifaceted the conversation was by bringing together so many voices from different backgrounds, sectors, and education. My question is simple, she says, and for whoever wants to answer. Do you feel optimistic about this current moment in time? So much discourse is about uncertainty, upheaval, inequity, etc., yet also unprecedented opportunity for change. If so, why, and why Windsor in particular? If anyone has a comment there.
I'll just jump in really quickly. For me, I'm so excited about it for that reason. And I think again, I can just speak to what I see, but the pandemic has obviously changed a lot of things for a lot of people. And when we're dealing with, people moving here and deciding to leave Toronto, which is just huge right now, I'm very happy to have everybody back who wants to be engaged and, be a part of this, and they come here. And I feel like right now, more than ever, our clients are taking this as an opportunity, and they're basically saying we think it's possible. We can actually make a change here, where maybe their voice feels too small in another city. And here they're saying, okay, like really there's an opportunity to showcase what's been the issue. And it's almost like, like a creative opportunity as well. Like what can we do? And I do feel that even in the 4 or 5 years I've been back, that the tone has changed a lot. I hear a lot less negativity than I used to, and that just feels good.
So Annika, sorry, Laverne.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I wonder if I can just jump in to say that I'm optimistic as well, and I'm optimistic because we have, for years we've had equality rights and equality rights instruments, that look across the spectrum, so that take into account, of course, minority perspectives, in addition to what the majority wants. But now with the pandemic, of course, I'm not happy about the virus itself, but the pandemic has offered us an opportunity to really put those equality rights, I think, into practice, a chance to come together. Even if we had equality rights before, I think that there were many who would argue that their particular minority rights were not necessarily regarded or acknowledged. And I think now we have an opportunity to really have everyone talk about the ways in which they can have their rights brought to the forefront. And so yes, I'm optimistic in that regard.
So Annika, I'm going to throw in something that my Kung Fu Sifu told me a long time ago. If you're comfortable, that means you've plateaued and you're not learning. If you're frustrated, uncertain, that is the time when you learn. So yes, now is the best time.
I'm also very optimistic, and it goes back to coming together of one mind, having that good heart and that good place And I see this echoed throughout everyone that shared their voice. I appreciate the wisdom that you brought forward. And we do have that commitment to create a better place for our future generations. And again, my ancestors say, whatever action you do today is going to impact the next 7 generations. So we think even longer strategically than 50 years in our planning and our actions today. And so let's come together under that tree of peace and come together with one mind, and we will create a beautiful place here in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Yahweh. Thank you.
I think in Windsor, it's so easy to feel defeated, at least as a youth. Like, you so often hear that that it's just Windsor, right? Compared to London, compared to Toronto, it's just Windsor. Or if you go away to Toronto, people say, "Where is Windsor?" So, but I think the discourse that we're having now, the discussions that we're having now, all of that is necessary because, as has been mentioned earlier, there are folks living among us who aren't comfortable, right? And so having those uncomfortable conversations are necessary to move forward. And I'm personally optimistic, but also mindful that optimism has failed our ancestors in the past, and that it's still important that while being optimistic, it's also important to keep our finger on the pulse and ensure that we're not lost on this moment. What I've seen between having our elders come out to support us, our community leaders come out to support us, youth come out in many different ways, not just related to BLM, for example, but we had like thousands of people on the streets as an example. I've never seen that in Windsor in my short 21 years of life in the city. And so that to me is just telling that we're on the cusp of a revolutionary moment. And for Windsor, that is that's incredible. And so that in itself is something for me I'm truly optimistic about.
Maybe that's a great spot. Thank you to all. And it's nice to end on a positive note. Mita, maybe I'll turn it over to you just to close things off.
I have I'm just filled with a lot of gratitude, and I am filled with so much thanks for all the speakers who, even though you had a very short amount of time to say, we do realize that it comes from a very deep and very rich and sometimes very painful experiences. And again, words is very difficult to express thank yous, how much it means to being here and making us healthier and stronger and coming together and making our city better. I want to thank Annika, and I want to thank Windsor Law for organizing. Sorry, Windsor Law Center. I'm losing the plot here.
Center for Cities.
Center for Cities. I'm so sorry. Yeah, no, it's just it's been wonderful, and this conversation will be it has been recorded. It will be made available on the Center for Cities website. I know that I will come back to it. I know I have some reading to do, and I have some work to do. We will formally, I guess, close this conversation because we have taken an hour and a half. But if people do want to stay just for a little longer and linger in the chat, if the panelists are available, we can kind of. It's not so much of an after party, but just to see if there's that sort of grabbing the speaker by the, while they're trying to grab that cup of coffee, we can do that. Anyways, thank you so much for everyone. Is there any last words, Annika? Is that it? That's it. How about just thank you?
Stay tuned. Yep. Thank you, everyone. And thanks so much to our panelists and to all the participants for your wonderful questions. And thanks for doing all the work that you all do. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.